Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're looking at something, well, frankly, pretty baffling. A massive tax case in Guyana just gone. Poof.
Right, vanished. And it's vanished right when a huge U.S. criminal case against the same people is really heating up.
Exactly. So we're digging into the story of Nazar and Azruddin Mohamed of Mohamed's enterprise, prominent Guyanese gold dealers.
And we're trying to connect these two things. The dropped local case involving just enormous sums of money and this very serious U.S. indictment for things like gold smuggling and money laundering.
Okay, so the starting point, the catalyst really, was Thursday morning, November 6th, 2025, Georgetown Magistrates Court.
That's when the Guyana Revenue Authority, the GRA, just withdrew all the tax charges against the Mohameds.
And the absolute crucial detail here, the thing that makes this so strange, is that according to all our sources, they gave no reason. None at all.
Which is, pretty unusual for a case of this size. It makes you wonder.
Definitely. Especially when you understand what the GRA was actually alleging before they dropped it. Let's get into that.
Sure. This wasn't just a minor issue. It came out of a big GRA audit. They looked really closely at the company's gold exports, their financial statement.
For quite a period, too, right?
Yeah, 5 years, income years 2019 right through to 2023. So years of assessment 2020 to 2024.
And what they claimed to have found was, well, it's kind of staggering. They alleged the Mohammeds didn't submit true and correct tax returns.
Understatement is putting it mildly. Based on the GRA's figures, they alleged the income tax alone that was understated came to 34.07 billion Guyanese dollars.
34 billion, just the tax. But then you add interest, penalties.
Right. When the GRA calculated everything, the interest that had built up, other sums they said were due, the total figure they were pursuing was 191.17 billion Guyanese dollars.
Okay, pause there. Because GYD billings can sound abstract. Let's put that into perspective for you listening internationally.
It's essential context. That $191 billion GYD, roughly speaking, translates to about US $919 million, nearly $1 billion US dollars. That's the scale of the alleged domestic tax debt the GRA was after.
So when a case about potentially $1 billion US dollars disappears overnight with no explanation, you start looking for other factors.
Absolutely. And these weren't just vague corporate charges either. They named names.
Let's break that down. Nazar Mohamed, the father,
Yeah.
What was he facing specifically?
He had multiple charges. One alleged he understated his taxable amount by almost $4.94 billion GYD. On that one, he'd apparently reported only about $66 million GYD in liability.
So a huge discrepancy alleged there.
A massive one. And another charge against him alleged an understatement of nearly $6.96 billion GYD. Again, the reported liability was much smaller, around $127 million GYD.
And then there's Azruddin Mohamed, his son, also facing serious charges.
Yes, very significant. And it's important to remember, as you pointed out earlier, he'd recently become an opposition member of parliament.
Right, which adds a whole political layer to this financial drama.
Definitely complicates the picture. Azruddin was alleged to have understated his own taxable obligation by over $7.03 billion GYD. His reported liability was about $105 million UID.
So just between those specific individual charges you mentioned, we're already talking about, close to $19 billion GYD in alleged understatements on top of the overall corporate picture.
That's right. It paints a picture of systematic underreporting, according to the GRA's initial findings.
And the legal basis was Section 110 of the Income Tax Act, Chapter 81.01. Pretty standard stuff for incorrect filings, legally speaking?
Correct. Failing to submit a true and correct return, that was the core allegation.
So to recap Section 1, meticulous multi-year audit, nearly $1 billion US dollars equivalent in alleged liability covering corporate and individual charges, specifically ground cited. And then gone, wiped from the local courts.
Exactly, which brings us to the obvious question, why? And the timing is surely key. This didn't happen in a vacuum.
No, it happened right in the shadow of intense ongoing scrutiny from the United States. Let's talk about that timeline.
Well, the U.S. involvement started visibly quite a bit earlier, back in June 2024.
That was the Treasury Department sanctions, right?
Yes. The U.S. Department of the Treasury hit both Nazar and Azruddin Mohamed plus Mohamed's enterprise with sanctions.
And what was the reason given then?
The Treasury cited alleged corruption and tax evasion linked to Guyana's gold export sector. They explicitly mentioned the Mohammeds exploiting what the U.S. called an under-regulated sector.
Okay, so sanctions are serious. They restrict access to the U.S. financial system, freeze assets, but it's not quite criminal charges yet.
Correct. Sanctions are an economic tool. a way to apply pressure, but then things escalated significantly.
When was that?
October 2025. So just weeks, literally weeks, before the GRA dropped the local tax case in Guyana.
What happened in October?
A U.S. federal grand jury in the Southern District of Florida handed down a formal criminal indictment against both men.
Okay, so now we're moving from Treasury sanctions to Department of Justice criminal prosecution. That's a whole different level.
Completely different. This is federal prison time potentially on the line. The charges are heavy: conspiracy, mail and wire fraud, money laundering, and crucially, gold smuggling.
Gold smuggling. That seems to be a major focus of the U.S. case, maybe more so than the pure tax angle the GRA had.
It appears so. The U.S. indictment gets very specific about the alleged smuggling operation.
How specific?
They allege that over 10,000 kilograms of gold were exported illegally.
10,000 kilos. That's 10 metric tons.
10 metric tons of gold, allegedly moved out of Guyana without the proper declarations, without paying the required taxes and duties to Guyana.
And did the U.S. authorities put a value on the loss to Guyana from that alleged smuggling?
They did. Their estimate, detailed in the indictment, is that this specific scheme cost the Guyanese government about U.S. $50 million in lost revenue.
Okay, so this helps clarify things. The GRA case was about potentially almost $1 billion in alleged income tax evasion over several years. The U.S. criminal case includes allegations of smuggling that cost Guyana maybe U.S. $50 million in export duties and related revenue, plus money laundering and fraud. Related but distinct financial crimes.
Exactly. Different facets of alleged financial wrongdoing. One focused on reporting income, the other on the physical movement and declaration of the gold itself, and the subsequent handling of the proceeds.
Which leads us squarely to connecting these dots. Why would Guyana walk away from its nearly billion-dollar local tax case right when the U.S. drops a massive indictment focused on smuggling and fraud that allegedly also cost Guyana money?
It's the central puzzle. The implication seems to be, well, a major shift in where the legal battle is really being fought. Meaning, with the local case discontinued, the entire focus, all the legal pressure regarding these alleged financial issues surrounding the Mohammeds, it now rests almost entirely on the U.S. criminal proceedings.
The domestic chapter is seemingly closed, legally speaking, even if the sums were enormous.
That appears to be the case. The international criminal case is now the main event.
But hang on. If you're the GRA and you think you're owed potentially hundreds of millions, maybe close to $1 billion, why just let it go? Doesn't that look, I don't know, weak? Or suggest some kind of problem with the local case?
It certainly raises questions about enforcement capacity, maybe strategy. One possibility, and this is just a theory, is that pursuing complex international money laundering and smuggling might simply be beyond the practical resources of a domestic tax agency like the GRA.
You mean tracing money across borders, dealing with international banks, that sort of thing?
Precisely. The U.S. federal system, with the FBI, international cooperation agreements, access to global financial tracking, they just have vastly more powerful tools for that kind of investigation compared to a national revenue authority focused primarily on domestic tax law.
So one interpretation is that maybe Guyana prefers the U.S. handle the heavy lifting on the criminal side, even if it means abandoning their own very large tax claim, like a tactical concession.
It's plausible. The U.S. case tackles the alleged core criminal activity, the smuggling, the fraud, the laundering, which perhaps has a stronger deterrent effect internationally. The GRA case, while huge financially, was fundamentally about incorrect tax filings. Maybe the feeling was the U.S. case addresses the root problem more directly.
And it all comes back to that initial U.S. Treasury statement about the underregulated gold sector.
Exactly. This whole saga, the sanctions, the huge but withdrawn tax case, the U.S. indictment, it puts Guyana's entire system for managing and regulating its gold exports under a very intense international spotlight.
It becomes a sort of test case, doesn't it, for regulation and enforcement in a resource-rich country.
Very much so. When the domestic authority steps back from such a massive case and an external power steps in with criminal charges, it does send a signal about where the effective power to regulate these major globally connected industries might actually lie.
So the key takeaway for you listening is this. Billions in local tax charges, dropped without a word of explanation. The entire legal future for the Mohammeds concerning these allegations now seems to hinge on the U.S. criminal case, the smuggling, the fraud, the money laundering.
It's a dramatic shift. The main legal battleground isn't Georgetown anymore, it's Miami. And the implications for Guyana's gold sector and how it's perceived internationally are potentially enormous. The U.S. is effectively stepping into a perceived regulatory gap.
Which leaves us with a final thought, something for you to ponder. Since the local case is closed, and the focus is now entirely on the U.S. criminal proceedings, what does it really mean for a country's economic sovereignty when enforcing the law around its own most valuable natural resources seems to fall to an external government?
It's a deep question about accountability, capacity, and who ultimately sets the rules in the global economy.
A sobering thought indeed. That's all we have time for on this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.